Thank you all for joining today. This is a very exciting moment in Ubiquity University because this is the first course in which we've had enrolled undergraduate BA students. So I want to welcome our Wisdom School students. We've been having this great course for our Wisdom School for a number of years, and now we're broadening it to include our undergraduates, BA and also MBA students. So I just want to thank you all for joining. I understand we have MBA from students from France, from Sri Lanka, from Germany, Ecuador, and we're getting applications for students that may be joining us from Malaysia, Cameroon, Australia, and Palestine. So that just gives you a sense of the global reach of Ubiquity University. And so welcome to our course on the great books. This is a core course. It's a course that every student has to take, whether at the graduate level or the undergraduate level, because we believe that an essential part of true learning is deeply engaging with the great works in written form that have been written by some of the great beings of our species for many thousands of years, east and west and north and south. We have an image at Ubiquity of an archer pulling back a bow. You know, the farther back you pull the bow, the farther forward, the truer your arrow will fly. So there's a lot of learning in technology, engineering, science, math. We're all on our smartphones, we're all in computers and on the internet. But that's at one level of our reality. At a deeper level, the farther back we pull our bow, the farther back we go in history to our origins, we will discover that human beings have been essentially the same since the rise of the species Homo sapiens about 50,000 years ago. Certainly, as a literate culture, over the last 5,000 years, to the first book, actually, that we have, the Epic of Gilgamesh, that was written just about 5,000 years ago. And so welcome to this course on the great books. I want to say just a few words about the requirements. This course, this trimester, this January trimester is one unit. And then May trimester will be another one unit. And then the the September trimester, a third unit, so that the BA students have to take 3 trimesters of the great books, 1 unit per course. The Wisdom School has a little bit different qualifications, well known to you. And then if you go on to our syllabus, there will be different BA requirements for the course and different requirements for graduate students, but you'll essentially all take the same course. So that the requirements for the course for everybody, graduate and undergraduate, are basically around 3 aspects. One is you have to read the books and attend the sessions. Although we're very mindful of the time zones and people's busy lives, so we have recordings of all of these lectures, which last about 120 minutes once a month. And we have done it this way because reading a great book is not an easy endeavor. You know, you don't storm the citadel of Plato or Confucius. It's like drinking fine wine. So we want our students to engage in these great books in a way that gives them time for the cultivation of their soul. And I'll be saying more about what makes a great book great in a moment. But reading the book, participating in the classes, entering into the discussions in our courses, and then finally and thirdly, we have a Facebook page which we'll send out to everybody now that the course has begun and we have the registration list. You're required to participate each month in our Facebook discussions, because we'll just seed conversations and issues and problems and challenges with our lectures. And then through the Facebook page, we will have an opportunity to dialogue with each other and with the faculty member and so forth. I also want to introduce Michael D. Molina. He's one of our doctoral students, and he has been our teacher assistant for the last several years, actually, because he loves this course, and he and I have a grand time together, and so he's one of our star students, so he'll be your teacher assistant. He'll be introducing himself to you. So if you need anything in the course of our time together, Michael is available. And we do 2 books per trimester, 6 books a year. And I guarantee you, if you take seriously each and every one of the books that you will read between now and December, it will change your life. Because we are each year seeking to put together a combination of books that span time, span culture, and span issues, so that you can be edified as you engage in what Plato called the enlargement of your soul. So we're going to start this month and February with Plato's Republic, the most widely read book in Western philosophy, written about 2,500 years ago by Plato in the city-state of Athens. Then in March and April, we will be looking at autobiographical notes from Albert Einstein with Dr. Will Tagle, the dean of our wisdom school, and considering one of the great minds, one of the great human beings of the 20th century. Then in May and June, I will return and lecture on Anna Gorenka's great work, The White Clouds, The Way of the White Clouds. And that's an exposition on Tibetan Buddhism, one of the great spiritual cultures and traditions of the last several thousand years. We're leading a pilgrimage, actually, to Mount Kailash in Tibet in August, if anyone is interested in joining. And I'm very much involved with that. And so I'll be meditating on Lama Govinda's work, The Way of the White Clouds, in May and June. And then Dr. Mark Ryan, who was our dean at the Wisdom School, associate dean for many years, will be talking about a book written about 100 years ago by a gentleman named Frederick Meyer, Human Personality and the Survival of Bodily Death. It was Frederick Meyer that really, I would say, initiated the discussion that profoundly shaped the social sciences with his understanding of the human psychic unconscious. If you think of Freud, if you think of Jung, if you think of Stan Grof, if you think of any of the psychological giants of the 20th century. They built their compendium of works on the insight, first initiated by Frederick Meyer, about the unconscious. And then in September and October, I'll be back again talking about the Analects of Confucius. Probably no other work in Eastern civilization has had the impact of the Analects of Confucius. Probably as large in its impact as the Bible in Western civilization. And then we'll culminate the year with Dr. Georgie Szabo, who is the Dean of Doctoral Studies at Ubiquity University, exploring an ancient Chinese classic, The Art of the Bedchamber, which was on the alchemical, sexual, spiritual art form of ancient China, and how the tantric spiritual tradition, also very powerfully present in India, can lead to spiritual illumination. So those are the 6 books that we're going to have the privilege of exploring in our course together for the balance of 2016. And so let me, since this is the first lecture of the year and we want to welcome the BA students and so forth, I thought before we dive into the apology, I want to take a couple of minutes to really reflect on what constitutes a great book. There have been probably millions of books written. There have been thousands that have been on the bestseller, but they're probably only in the hundreds of all the books ever written by all the people that have put the pen to paper or their fingers on a computer that would be defined as great. What constitutes a great book? I'd love to have this as a discussion on our Facebook page. I would like to submit to you that there are 3 criteria for making a book great. The first one is that it's a book that impacts people across time and across cultures. I mentioned the Apology. The Apology is the most widely read philosophical text in the world and has been that way for several thousand years. It's influenced philosophical thinking by intellectuals everywhere in the world. I mentioned the Analects of Confucius, written by the disciples of Confucius about 500 BC, before even the Apology was written. And that work served as the foundation of the entire monumental achievement of Chinese civilization, and in fact, Eastern thought taken as a totality. You think of Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey. You think of the Bhagavad Gita. You think of Jalaluddin Rumi, a Persian poet of the 13th century, writing in Arabic and in Persian. Rumi is the most popular and well-read and often read poet in the world today, East and West, a Persian poet. So a great book is a book that endures over time, that speaks to people in profound ways, wherever they come from, whatever language they speak, whatever God they believe in, whatever culture that has shaped their minds. These books speak to them, even in translation. And that leads to the second reason, in my view, that certain books are determined as great. Books endure over time and across culture because they speak to noble issues. They speak to the great spiritual, historic, moral challenges that confront human beings as individuals and as communities, as nations, and as a species. You think of the opening lines of the Iliad by Homer. O Muse, speak of the wrath of Achilles. War is endemic in human society, and it's motivated by anger, by competition. And so the Iliad, in just teasing out the wrath of Achilles, defined Greek civilization and is still read to the present day. You think of the great works of Shakespeare, the tragedies of Shakespeare, Macbeth. You think of the poetry of T.S. Eliot, and grappling as he did with the aftermath of the First World War and the malaise of the entire European culture when they realized that over 10 million of their young had been laid waste on the fields of battle. And T.S. Eliot writes The Wasteland and really challenged post-war Europe to grapple with the fact that it had fought a war and created a wasteland. So these great books aren't trivial. That's why they take time. That's why we only do one over 2 months, and we meet once a month, because we want you to go into these great works and allow them to come into a direct encounter with everything that you believe, and demonstrate a willingness to be challenged. Every student should be looking forward to that person, that teacher, that book that's going to change their mind, which leads to the third point. Great books have a transformational impact on the reader. Just think of how many people have had their lives completely changed by reading the Bible. There's a whole organization called the Gideons that just puts Bibles in hotel rooms. And there are stories by the thousands of people coming into their room, desolate, despairing, lonely, and they pick up the Bible. And the page opens, and they read a verse, and that verse pierces their heart. And they fall to their knees, and they realize that they have an opportunity to recreate their world anew. Think of the Bhagavad Gita. Mahatma Gandhi called it the dictionary of his life. He carried it with him every day. He read out of the Bhagavad Gita because the Bhagavad Gita pierced his heart, shaped his life. And he died. His last words were from the Gita. So great books, like great teachers, endure over time and across culture. They take on noble issues, sometimes excruciating issues that confront each and every human being and each and every society. And they do so with an intelligence of their own. They transform lives. Just think of how many battles have been fought over the Quran, the Bible. They can upend entire civilizations. And that's why they say that the pen is mightier than the sword. Books have had more of an impact on history than any general who ever raised the standard and marched forward. No king that's ever lived has had the impact of a book. So great books are foundational, and that's why it's a core course for Ubiquity University. So anyway, I just wanted to start with that, and maybe we can return to it when we get to the discussion. But great books are important because they give us grounding in the eternal truths which endure, and particularly in a time such as ours, where all seems to be confusion and everyone is adrift and everyone's doing that which is right in their own eyes. These great books and deep thinking are powerfully grounding in the substrate of what constitutes our essential humanity. So that's just a word of opening around what constitutes a great work. And that brings me to Plato's Apology, which, as I mentioned, is the most widely read work in the Western philosophical tradition, probably the world's philosophical tradition. And it was a work that was written by the man Plato, who lived from 424 to 347 BC in the city-state of Athens, which I'll describe in a few minutes. He was an aristocrat from a very wealthy, storied family of ancient Athens. He was very well educated. He was also a wrestler. His actual name was Aristocles. That was his given name. But he was a wrestler. And Plato comes from Platon. That means broad shoulders. So just imagine the greatest thinker in Western civilization was a wrestler. And it's interesting to note that his dialogues, unlike Immanuel Kant, which everything is written out with Germanic precision and logic, and each point follows the other, Plato wrote like a wrestler. All his works were dialogues between people, walking along the way, after dinner at somebody's house. And it's the wrestling with the great issues that constitute the genius of Plato. And he never wrote about himself. He wrote about a man called Socrates. And Socrates was another figure in ancient Athens that lived from 469 to 399. And the Apology is about his trial. Now, Socrates was an extraordinary man, but a very humble man. His father was a stonemason, and Socrates also was a stonemason. He cut up stones and made blocks of stones and carved stone. Just think about the strength of Socrates' hands. Unlike Plato, he was never really educated. Unlike Plato, he never wrote anything down. Unlike Plato, he didn't have a home. He wandered the marketplace. He stopped people and just asked them questions. He was born poor. He died poor. And yet, like Jesus and Confucius, who came from very humble origins. Jesus was a carpenter. Confucius was born as a minor official. They never wrote anything. They were peripatetic. They just moved around. They talked with people, mostly individually and in small groups. But no figure in history has had the impact of Socrates and Jesus and Confucius. The Buddha was the same thing, peripatetic, didn't write anything down, just spoke. And spoke with such power, such transformational impact, that their disciples, Socrates, Jesus, Buddha, Confucius, wrote everything down and got together immediately after their deaths and tried to sort out, who was this man? How do we remember? How do we record everything that we can recall? Because what just happened changed our lives, and over time changed history itself. So that man, Socrates, a humble stonemason, was probably the most important thing that ever happened to Athens, and certainly shaped Plato's life and shaped the entire edifice of the Western philosophical tradition. Now, what I would like to do before we actually jump into the apology, which we'll actually do next time in my second lecture, I want to spend the balance of my time today in setting the context for the trial of Socrates. Because oftentimes we read a book coming from the deep past, and it's like in our hands, we're trying to read it. We have no idea of the context that produced it. And my experience as someone who has studied as many of the great books as he could over many, many decades now, my own experience is that the more I know about the context within which a book was written and shaped and received, the more I appreciate it in my own life. So whenever I give my lectures on these various great books, as students who had me before can testify, I love to start with context. Because if you don't know where you are, it's really difficult to get the coordinates about where you're going to go or where everything fits in. So I love to set context, because context shapes content. Form follows function. And so if you were born, for example, in the 13th century, as Saint Francis was, of Assisi in Italy, and Jalaluddin Rumi was in Afghanistan, ending up in Turkey, both were deep mystics. But because Saint Francis was born in a Catholic culture, he became a great Catholic mystic. And because Jalaluddin Rumi was born and shaped and raised in a Muslim culture, he became a great Islamic scholar and mystic. There's a difference in spirituality if you were born in ancient Japan, in the time of the great samurai and the warrior culture there, and whether you were born in London in the Victorian England of the later part of the 19th century. Some of you, even on this call, are from different countries. Cameroon today is very different than being a student in France. Australia is very different than Ecuador or Malaysia or the United States. So taking time to really understand the context within which Socrates and Plato lived their lives, and Socrates was condemned to die in the trial that was described in the Apology of Plato, will, I think, not only deepen our appreciation for this great work and that great man, Socrates, but I think make us a little bit more aware of our own contemporary time, because what I would like to tease out is that the experience of Socrates 2,500 years ago in ancient Athens was and is remarkably similar to what is occurring today in the United States as another epoch, completely different, but fundamentally the same. So let me frame this, and let me begin by saying that about 1200 BC, there was the Great Trojan War. And that was the time also that Moses was alive in Egypt and had the beginnings of the Judaic civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean. Well, in the land of Greece and Turkey, there was a great war that we all hear about today. It's endured over time, codified in the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer. And as a result of that war, the entire culture of Greece and Western Turkey collapsed into a great dark age. And that's one of the first points I want everybody on this phone call to really get. War does not produce enlightenment. It produces darkness. And when a country engages in perpetual war, the price it pays, the consequences that are unleashed are catastrophic. And for 400 years, Greece had no writing, had no literate culture, and was in darkness. And then, for reasons that historians don't quite understand, around the 8th century BC, Greece started to re-civilize itself. And from about 800 to 600 to 500 BC, the Greek city-states began to re-quicken, and there began to be a formation of two particularly strong city-states. One was Sparta, and one was Athens. And around 500 BC, the Persians invaded, and the Greeks fought them off in the great battles of Marathon. The Persians were expelled. And what began to emerge then as a result of that great defeat of Persia is that Athens began to rise as the most powerful imperial power in Greece. And between about 461 And 429, right in the middle of the 5th century BC, there was an extraordinary outpouring of, I would say, genius that created, probably, according to many historians, the greatest civilization that has ever existed in human history. And as has been said by many, never before have so few people accomplished so much in so many areas of human endeavor that has had such an extraordinary impact down through time and across culture. Whether it was history or medicine or science or politics or drama, political science, philosophy. There was not a single field of human endeavor that wasn't explored by the Athenians in a way that was foundational, certainly for Western civilization, and in some cases for human civilization itself. And at the apogee of their power, of their genius, of their gifting of knowledge and wisdom and insight in field after field after field to the world, they succumbed to a war, the Peloponnesian War, that they fought for 30 years with Sparta, and at the end of which Athens was completely destroyed. And if you think of the extraordinary grandeur of the United States in the 20th century, a light on the top of the hill. And for the last 70 years, we have been in perpetual war. And look where the United States is now. Look where the world is now. Because the greatest power has perpetrated perpetual war, mostly in the Middle East, but also in Asia and Africa and Latin America. And so when we talk about the apology, when we grapple with what Socrates was challenging the Athenians to grapple with, when we think of the dialogues of Plato, let us remember that he was born 3 years after the beginning of the Peloponnesian War. Both Socrates and Plato actually fought in the Peloponnesian War. And it was in that transposition of history and values and power and virtue from a light on the top of the hill, the country that everybody wanted to emulate, to the tyranny of the 30, beginning in 404, when Athens was completely defeated. That the greatest philosophers that ever lived in the Western compendium lived and taught and wrote and established the great dialogues that we've come to know. I'd like to dwell on this for a moment because it is so poignant about our current world situation. You know, we've just had the ISIS attacks in Paris. Here in the United States, we've had the shootings in San Bernardino. We have the cauldron of Syria. We've had the Chinese invasion of Tibet. We have conflicts in Africa. And we need to think about our contemporary reality very poignantly as we think of the apology. Because this little humble stonemason was not executed for no reason. In the tumult of the Athenian experience, as everything they had built was crashing to the ground, what he endured and what he said is so applicable to us today that it is almost shocking in its contemporary nature. And I'd like to parse this just for a few minutes, knowing that I've got to watch the time here, by referring back to Pericles and his funeral oration at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War that no doubt Socrates probably attended. Because Athens was really a small little city-state of about 250,000 people, about 100,000 of which were slaves, and about 150,000 of which were citizens. But of the 150,000, about 40,000 were men. And the men, as you know, in ancient Athens were the only ones who could vote. And that was certainly the case in Europe and in the United States until, the last 75 to 100 years, when women and other minorities were finally given the right to vote. But he says in the funeral oration, we are fighting this war because this is a just war. Because Athens is a model for the world. We are a school, he said, for all of Greece. How many times do you hear this from political leaders, officials in the United States and in Europe? We are the pinnacle of civilization. Our way of life is worth fighting for, and we're fighting in the Middle East. We're doing what we're doing in Vietnam, et cetera, because our way of life is better than anybody else's way of life. Our Constitution, said Pericles, is a democracy. We don't put our power in the hands of a few like the Spartans do, who are oligarchs. We give our power to the hands of the many. Now, remembering, as I said, the many were just men. But there, the experiment of democracy in Athens was more radical than anything that's ever been done before or since. There's no country ever, anywhere, that has been as radically democratic as the Athenians. Because everybody, all the men, were invited to participate. In America, for example, we have a representative democracy. We don't have a true democracy. In Europe, they don't have true democracies. It's representative. We elect leaders, and the leaders actually make the decisions. And that's one reason why it's so corrupt, by money and other external forces. And in Athens, they had a direct democracy, and all 40,000 men were invited to come together in regular sessions, and they had to have a quorum, actually, of 6,000. At least 6,000 of them had to be there. Can you imagine trying to make decisions with 6,000 people and no microphones, all crowded into a stadium? How would you even begin to chair such a session or get an agenda? It was very, very direct. But it was a model that they believed that was responsible for the outpouring of the genius that made them the school of Athens. And they, as a result, were a great commercial success. They were the richest city-state in all of Greece and in the Eastern Mediterranean, just like the United States and the Europeans. They're the wealthiest countries, in the world. And so I just want everybody to kind of feel, those of you who are from the United States and Europe in particular, how self-satisfied we are of our culture, just like Pericles was. And for that reason, he believed, as we have believed, that we are warranted to go to war, to conquer other peoples, and to bring everyone in underneath our hegemony and control. And you can't do that without perpetual war. And one of the great works, which I'll probably refer to, if not in 2017 and 2018, was the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. And in his account of Pericles' funeral oration, he mentions that directly after this celebration of their greatness, the war really began in earnest. And on an island of Corcyra, not far from Corinth in the Peloponnese, the two factions between Sparta and Athens fought with such savagery that father was turned against son, brother against brother, mother against daughters, families were ripped apart, and cruelties were unleashed that staggered the imagination. And what Thucydides said in the Peloponnesian War is that what Athens learned is that violence, that war is a violent teacher. And he said it was really the love of power that brought the war. It was not all the virtues that they were espousing about themselves that was the cause of the war. That was the illusion, because none of that was really there. What was really there was the love of power. That was the cause of all the evils, says Thucydides. And so what one saw as Athens went from the top of the mountain down into the abyss was a general deterioration of character. And then one of the great lines of his great work, where he says, when normal conventions were thrown into confusion, human nature showed its true colors and repealed those laws that had elevated humankind to civilization. And if you think of what's coming out of the Middle East right now, if you think of ISIS, if you think of the wars in the Congo, if you think of the general deterioration of normal conditions, that's what's happening around the world as we enter into the realm of hypercomplexity. And it was within those contexts, those great contradictions, that Socrates, that little stonemason, walked around Athens and asked his questions like a gadfly, and Plato wrote his great dialogues. Several of Socrates' students, Alcibiades and Critias, actually played major roles in the Peloponnesian War. And so when we come to the actual trial, which we'll get into next time, I want us all to understand this very simple point that I'm making here, is that this great work transpired at a time very similar to ours, where after a period of greatness, the entire edifice had been destroyed because we had been engaging in perpetual war and had succumbed, as was in the case of Athens, to a mob rule that destroyed the foundations of everything that they had labored over centuries to achieve. And it's within that context that I will conclude my remarks today, and open up this discussion of the first of our great books, The Apology of Plato. Now, normally what we do, I'll call on several people, particularly some of you undergraduates, because I want to bring you into the discussion. But we generally start with Mark Ryan and then Will Tagle, who are teachers, faculty with me for these great books, just to get the discussion going. But I want people to think of their comments. We welcome disagreement. I always take particular points of view and I put them out there and welcome whatever comes back, because we don't at Ubiquity believe in truth possessed. We only believe in truth pursued. And so what you've heard from me over the last hour or so is just my little humble attempt at truth pursued. So thank you. And Mark, I hope you're on the call, and welcome.
So Jim, this is Dan, and Mark has had some technical difficulties joining the call. He may still join before the call's over, but we have Will on the line.
Great. So Will, jump in.
Yeah, Jim, and thank you everybody, and thank you for that that broad and very rich expression. I also would call attention to people at the on your Zoom window. If you'll connect with chat, there's been an interesting constant rich resource for us to interact with each other during the course of our time. So I want to make a couple of comments and then ask you a question, Jim. One comment is that as we're approaching the apology, the Greek word apologia is a very powerful word in and itself. Apo is a Greek preposition which is interpreted in a lot of different ways, and we don't know exactly how Plato was using it. Logia or logos is translated sometimes as word, but also sometimes as meaning. So in some sense, the Greek preposition apo means out of, or from. So our encounter with this particular expression of the trial of Socrates could be seen as out of meaning, growing out of the soil, a compost of meaning. And that brings to my mind the great work by Viktor Frankl on logotherapy. So where he's talking about the survival of people in the wars that you were mentioning in his imprisonment during World War II, that it was out of meaning that survival and thriving came. So in some sense, that's an important guideline to keep in mind as we read this book. And then one other comment about Greek. We know that the Greek preposition dia is through, and logos is meaning. So dialogue is through, moving through meaning, through the tension of opposites as we encounter each other. So those are my comments. And my question of you, Jim, is, has your wrestling with the apology, with Plato's apology, given you meaning and perhaps healing as you act as a midwife for a university?
Wow, what a great question. Let me come to that, but I want to just thank you for your comments. And I was just looking at the chat that you guys were having while I was talking, and your point, Will, I could not agree more. And we should all hold that, everybody. You know, The Pyramids are a great book. Every year, Will and Judith and the, Earth Tribe, takes a group down to the Pyramid of the Sun, the great Toltec pyramids outside of Mexico City. Those are books. Diane Browsey's correct. The Whirling Dervishes, that's another book, another pathway, another portal of illumination. And I think we ought to incubate this idea. This is a delight. I hadn't really considered that before, but I think this is a delightful thing that maybe one of the things we'll do over time is expand the notion of what is a book, and include pyramids and dances and great oral traditions from the Aboriginals, for example. So yes to all of that, and let's take that in and maybe let it help us shape what's going to take place in 2017. So thank you so much. This is a great impulse. And then to your point about the apologia and dialogue, yes, these words have very deep meaning. Apologia, apology, does not mean saying you're sorry. In Plato's understanding of apologia, it had a completely different meaning in ancient Greek, and it had much more to do with a major statement. Sort of a defense of the realm, where you really speak something definitively, as Socrates did in his trial. And then just coming to your question, when I was 18, I refused the draft. I came of age during the Vietnam War, and they had the draft back in those days, and I was sent a letter by the U.S. Army saying I had to go take a physical. I refused. I was then sent a letter from the Justice Department saying that I was potentially guilty of 2 felonies. One would carry a penalty of 5 years in prison, federal prison, and the other would be a $10,000 fine. And they gave me a new date to go take my physical. And if I would take that other physical, all would be kind of forgotten. And I refused. And I got into a very, very heated argument with my father and my family, and they kept saying, just take your physical. Just take your physical. And I went back into my room, and I was only 18, and I wasn't very sophisticated. I was, I was basically into sex, what is it, and rock and roll. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, like every 18-year-old was in those days. We were the flower children, and I wasn't, I basically didn't want to cooperate because I felt very benign about the Vietnamese. I was born in China, and I was really confused. And after my father had really shouted me down and sent me to my room, I sat on the bed for a while, pretty despondent, about ready to give in because I was just scared. And I went to my bookshelf and I randomly picked a book. And it was Plato's Apology. And I sat on the bed and I read the trial of Socrates and him standing up for what he knew to be true. And at the core of the apology, which we're going to fill out in some detail next time, is his great line that the unexamined life is not worth living. And when I read those words that night, when I was 18 years old, I began to cry. And I knew beyond a shadow of doubt that I was never going to take my physical under any circumstances, whatever the price. And so the apology for me has been one of the precious, precious works that gave me the strength at a very tender age to stand for what I knew to be essentially true, independent of the family and cultural and political variables. So when you ask the question, the apology is a really a close work in my little life. I've treasured it very, very much. And that's one reason, Will and everyone, I made the context I did around the greatness that was America and how deeply we've fallen because we've succumbed to perpetual war. And it was the trial of Socrates in the middle of all that. Like the crucifixion of Jesus. If you think of Socrates and Jesus, you know, their whole lives came down to one event: the trial and the crucifixion. Everything else is derivative. And that's why I'm opening up this year with the great books with the apology. So let's call on others here. Now, Dan, did you tell people if you have questions or you want to make comments, please just jump in. Are there any ones that have raised their hands, Dan?
I don't have any hands raised at the moment.
Well, I'll call on some people. Let me start with Diane Browsey. You're out there in Palestine. I would love to hear your reflections on my remarks about the apology. If you can come through.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Ooh, I think we lost her, Dan. Ooh, I don't think you're coming through, Diane.
Let me try again.
Oh, there you go. There you go. There you go.
Okay.
Hang in there.
I'm here in bed with one of my young Palestinian women friends, and she just went through a crash down today in relation to parents and expectations and all, and was crying, and I was trying to console her about how everybody has to go through their difficulties in order to find who they are and stand for what they believe in. And so we're giggling here because it's like you're speaking directly to us and to her, and it's so exciting. And you know, we're in the midst of war here, her father was coming back from Nablus, which should be 45 minutes away. It took 3 hours today because the Israeli military were holding the checkpoints and hopefully not killing anywhere in here, although 4 young people got killed in Bethlehem and Hebron today. So, you know, we're in this perpetual war that America has a very large part in allowing to continue. So it's so relevant what you're talking about, and it's, you know, it's exciting to see you there.
Does your friend there want to say anything? Does she speak English? Does you know, if you, I don't even know her name, but if you'd like to speak, whoever you are, I think the story I shared.
This is Hiba.
I'm Hiba. Happy to meet you and to be part of this great book's conservations and thoughts. I'm a little shy, but I don't know what to tell you.
Well, just welcome, and I just want to extend to you our deepest support. I'm not sure any of the details of what Diane was describing, but all strength to you, and however we can assist you in participating with our courses at Ubiquity University.
And I appreciate everything you are speaking about. I appreciate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. Dave McQuarrie, what would be your comment on these matters from Canada? I think you're still muted, Dave. You go to your bottom left.
I've got it. Can you hear me?
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. I wasn't expecting to be called upon, but yeah. Well, the major thing that I would underline is the combination of the trials of one's life and Socrates' statement that the unexamined life is not worth living. You and I have had a number of conversations about this over the years, and certainly that the central dilemma for me of our civilization is that for the last 400 years, we have gradually drifted away from a valuing of the depth of individual experience. We have our philosophies, we have our textbooks, we have the writings of Kant, we have the writings of Einstein, but they have not penetrated to the depth of our culture. We have not transformed ourselves. And until we transform ourselves, we are not going to survive as a species, let alone a civilization. So that would be my major comment, that in that sense, the great books are a potential vehicle for individual transformation, but I have no idea what we need to do as a cultural transformation, and I'm deeply saddened by that.
Well, that's actually an important point. Thank you so much. That these great works, thinking of Kant, for example, thinking of Einstein, and we'll be diving into Einstein in a couple months, but oftentimes they stand on the margins of the culture and continue to have a dialectical relationship with the culture as different individuals, as I recounted even in my own little life, interact with them and receive deep individual solace and renewal. But as a culture as a whole, you know, the number of great books that have been really absorbed are few and far between. They speak to us in a dialogic way over time, and that's another reason for their greatness. That's a very, very good point. And the deeper question that you're raising about how we develop the mechanisms for renewal in our culture at this critical time is a huge, huge question, in some ways far beyond the scope of the Great Books course, but it's certainly one that we try to influence in our own very small way by having courses like the Great Books that invite people to think more deeply about their lives. So thank you.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and I look forward, Dave, to see you in a couple of weeks at the Wisdom in the New Civilization course in just north of San Francisco here. So looking forward to that. By the way,
as am I.
By the way, just so everybody knows, Dave wrote a brilliant, my view, brilliant PhD dissertation on this, real question of, the lethargy in our culture. Why was it that Athens couldn't see what was happening to itself and allowed itself to be completely destroyed? It just kind of couldn't wake up from its lethargy. And we today, in thinking about climate change or thinking about, mass violence in America or thinking about the Middle East, we tend to have this this lethargy in our psyches, in our souls, that seems to somehow conspire against the transformation we always want with our heads. And we say we want passionately, but don't. I mean, it was a brilliant dissertation, and I hope some of you will be able to read the book that was produced from it. So that's Dave McQuarrie, and Diane Browsey, who's another one of our students and has been spending time in the Middle East, just bearing witness to that region of the world. I mean, that's one of the beauties of this course, particularly now that we're on Zoom, and we'll all learn to use it over the next period of time. We can see each other, we can interact with each other, and I'll try to introduce different people as they come online.
Just as a final comment, Jim.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to read my dissertation, send me an email and I'll send you an electronic copy of the dissertation.
Yeah, maybe put your email, Dave, in the chat so people know how to reach you. That's in the chat, so everybody knows. If you just take your little cursor and put it at the bottom of the screen, you get a bunch of options. You get the mute button, the video, participants. You can see who's on, question and answer, share screen. If we want to share photos or anything like that. And then there's a little chat button where we had the very good dialogue about expanding beyond books. So
I just added it.
Excuse me?
I just added it.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you.
Jim, there's on the question and answer, Catherine Stace from Australia asked a question. And maybe you can access her if she's available, but she's got a good question there.
There we go. Catherine, thank you. Says hi from Jerry and Catherine from Australia. Welcome from Australia. It's very early in the morning for you. So thank you doubly for joining. And that's one reason why we have the call hour now. We can get everybody in the States, everybody in Europe. It's a little late at night for Europe. But then early morning into Australia. Is that you, Catherine?
Yeah, hi, we're online.
Hey, look at that. Bright sunny day, springtime in Australia. Cool. Well, welcome. And just say a word about yourselves, and then ask your question, and then I'll comment from there.
Okay, well, I'm just so honored and enthralled with what you're saying, so thank you. Yeah, I found Ubiquity University because I was telling someone that I have a deep need to contribute to society and to our planet, and I want to go access truth because I'm working in the innovation space, and there's so many inventions and ideas, but are they the right course to take? You know, and how do we look at deep design in whole systems change? So I'm really interested in how we transition society and making sure that we get the blueprint right, rather than chasing ideas and innovation that might take us down the wrong path. And it's really important to seed knowledge back into design. So that's really what I'm so excited to connect with you all on. So thank you. And Jerry.
Yeah, hi, this is Jerry. I am into Buckminster Fuller and his connection of physical and metaphysical. So I've been working around this for many years, and so I've always had the interest in philosophy, and I just thought this was an amazing course that you're offering, and I love your speaking around context and how you have that personal connection with Plato's Apology. So that was fantastic to hear that, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how everything unfolds here. So yeah, thank you.
Great to have you with us. And so your question, Catherine, was around the relationship between transformation and transition?
Correct. Yes, I think sometimes that we tend to want to reach the end goal in an impatient way. And I think transitioning requires whole systems approach. And so to do that, we need to change both our mindset and our environments to shape our new behaviors, you know, because environments change behaviors. And so I'm really interested to know, in whole systems design will take probably more than 6,000 people to collaborate. But I do think we can draw reference from what happened in Greece. So look, I'm really interested to know how we transition society, and the outcome will be transformation.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways you're asking the $64,000 question, as we say, because all of us know that our societies, whether it's there in Australia, or here in the United States, in Palestine, Canada, you know, all of us know we need to undergo fundamental change, and it needs to be systemic. It needs to be a transformation by design, because everything's interconnected, and that transition is what we're all looking to catalyze in some way, and nobody's been yet able to figure out how exactly to do that. You know, even the great masters, I mean, you just think of Jesus, for example. He ended up getting crucified. Socrates ended up being executed through drinking poison. So when you try to change a culture, particularly a culture under duress, as always happens when a culture succumbs to war, they will sooner kill the messenger than engage in the transformation that even they themselves know they need. That's the paradox of the trial of Socrates. That's the paradox of the trial and crucifixion of Christ. And so you're staking out an issue that has, you know, a very deep, I would say, consequential implication. And I would like to, you know, not even try to answer it, because I don't think there's answers yet. I would just like to honor it by saying you've asked a very deep question that humanity needs to grapple with at a time when challenges like climate change are actually eroding the very foundations of civilization itself. So thank you so much for posing that question. We'll probably return to it certainly next time, because Socrates died trying. You died trying, boy. And I think to make one comment that tees up next time, he said, as you have said, you have to start by examining your life. You have to start by examining your assumptions. You have to start by questioning that which you believe to be most fundamentally true, because it probably isn't as true as you think it is. And so it's that inquiry, that examination that people fear, but is actually the key to their own transition to a higher realm of consciousness. So thank you so much for that. Thank you. Let's see, I think we have time for one more. And let's go to Madhushika Pereira. Are you still with us? Madhushika Pereira? Maybe not. Then how about Jonathan? Jonathan, are you with us?
Hi, Jim.
Hello.
Hello. Jim, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Jim, first of all, I would like to wish you a very happy new year, and everyone who is attending this first session today with Ubiquity University. Hi, everyone. Jim,
You're from Sri Lanka.
I'm from Sri Lanka, Jim.
Fantastic.
That's right.
So it must be the middle of the night for you.
Exactly. It is actually saying it is 3:30 a.m. here.
Oh my goodness. Well, you get a star. You get an A for this lecture for being up at 3:30 in the morning for this.
Exactly. Because I'm enjoying the session, and I was really, I was into the session, and I'm really very happy to attend on this first seminar. And Jim, actually, you said about apology with your experience for come up with this great book for the first time. Jim, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. What I wanted to ask Jim now, when we go through the book, the content, you came up with the content, and you said that context gives the idea, overall idea about the content. So, and when we come back to the apology, you said that an examined life is not worth living.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be able to give me? You gave the idea. I would be appreciate if you could give me a broader explanation, but in a nutshell form about this particular statement with regards to the experience in the personal life, in individual's life. How do you say that an unexamined life is not worth living? How should you get this statement into us as an individual, and how can we make it in practice?
Well, first of all, for 3:30 in the morning, you've asked a very articulate question. So again, I really want to thank you for participating. And Madhushika is our first BA student from Sri Lanka. She's there and been working with Dilani Gunakasera at the London Business School. That's one of our academic partners. And so I really want to welcome you and thank you for participating. And
thank you so much.
I would say that your question will be the real framework for the next lecture, when we really go into the actual text of the apology and unpack why Socrates made that statement and what he meant by that statement, because he meant something very, very specific. And so given the fact that it's we're about at the end of our time, let me just flag this as the question with which we'll kind of open in next month's phone call. But let me say that as people prepare for next month, in the spirit of Madushka's question, I would say hold this as just a koan, a mantra in your life every day. You know, write it down. The unexamined life is not worth living. And between now and next month, let's just go through an exercise of examining all those things that we think are true, all those things that we think are givens in our lives. You know, in Sri Lanka, it's going to be different than it is for Catherine and Jerry in Australia, that it's going to be different to Dave in Canada and Diane in Palestine.
Correct.
So what assumptions have you made about your life, your family, your community, that as now a student, you should start questioning? Not that you'll change anything, but that it would be very healthy for you to begin to examine what religious assumptions, what personal assumptions, what civic assumptions. So that's what I would say, and I think that's a beautiful way to end the call. You know, David's point about why there's so much lethargy in our culture, Catherine's point about the imperative to engage in meaningful ways to produce transformation so we can transition to the next level. And now your point about what actually does the unexamined life mean, and why do we have to do it? Because as Socrates says, if you don't examine your life, you're already dead.
Understood.
You're already dead. It's the examined life that brings life up and out and changes everything. So this has been a great dialogue. I want to thank all of you as we bring this call to a close. I want to remind all of you, and we'll send out our Facebook link to be interactive on our Facebook page between now and then. I've just given you the question that should occupy your time and attention, and then we'll send out a reminder to everyone for next month's call. It's always the second Tuesday of every month. That's what we always just have it, the second Tuesday of every month, and we're still working out the time zones. There's no way to get everybody in the world in the right time zone, so we're doubly appreciative for your willingness, Madushka, to get up at 3:30 in the morning, and maybe we'll play with different timings in different trimesters so that we give everybody an equal opportunity to get up at 3:30 in the morning. But
thank you so much for your information as well.
And maybe Dan, if you can open up everybody's mute, we can all say goodbye together, and we'll meet a month from now. So thank you, everyone.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.